Fusion Mobile, quality e-learning experience on the go.
All right, good students. So far we have looked at the use of tables, okay? And in that use of tables, along with the use of tables, we have looked at resolving logarithms of numbers greater than 1, okay? We looked at the number 2468, and then we looked at 24.68. Now, those are two examples, and they are clearly numbers greater than 1, right? Fine. So, now we will go on to consider logarithm of numbers less than 1. Logarithm of numbers less than 1, okay? And of course, we still continue with our use of tables, okay? We'll get the logarithm of numbers along with the use of tables. Now, what do we mean by a number less than 1? For instance, we have looked at the number 2, 4, 6, 8. Fine. 2, 4, 6, 8 is clearly greater than 1. Now, what if we have it 0.246? Okay, before we go that far, let me go this way. Of course, our characteristic here was what? 3. So when we have 246.8, our characteristic becomes what? 2. And when we have 24.68, our characteristic becomes 1. So when we have 2.468, our characteristic becomes what? Simply 0. So for all the numbers greater, okay, for all the numbers greater than 1, for all the numbers greater than 1, the highest characteristic you can have is what? 0. Or rather, say greater than 1. For all the numbers greater than 1, your characteristic is what? The least characteristic you can get is 0. Now, we can proceed to have 0.246, okay? 0.246. 8. Now, what becomes our characteristic here? Our characteristic here will be what? Negative. Maybe minus 1. Yes. But you see, if we use minus 1, I'll demonstrate something to you very quickly. We can't use minus 1. We rather use bar 1. So, bar 1 is written like this. A bar on top of 1. This is what we use. Now, the reason we use bar 1 is because the characteristic is different from the mantissa. Okay? The characteristic, this bar, affects only the characteristic and not the mantissa. The mantissa of this number you have here will remain the same irrespective of how many times the characteristic decides to change, depending, of course, on how the decimal points shift. So, when we have 0.02468, okay? Now, where do we have the significant figure? the significant figure begins after the second count, right? 1, 2, or rather begins with the second count. So the significant figure 1, 2. So our bar, or rather our characteristic will become what? Bar 2. Sorry, let me bring it a little close. Bar 2. Fine. And when we have 0.002468, our significant figure begins at what? The third place after the decimal point. 1, 2, 3. So 2 is the first significant figure there, and it begins at the third place. 1, 2, 3. So our characteristic becomes what? Bar 3. Now, that is how it goes. Again, the mantissa will always remain the same. Do you remember the mantissa of the other one? Okay, we had our mantissa as what? Go back, replay the video. Your mantissa was 3, 9, 2, 3. Okay, 3, 9, 2, 3. 3, 9, 2, 3. And I tell you, all of these, okay, these are for numbers less than 1. Do you get it? All of these are for numbers less than 1. Of course, if you were to write this in standard form, how would it look like? If you were to write this in standard form, it would be what? If you were to write this in standard form, it would be what? 2.468 times 10 raised to power minus 1. Not so. Times 10 raised to power minus 1. So minus 1 here becomes bar 1. Times 10 raised to power minus 2, bar 2. Times 10 raised to power minus 3, bar 3. Now, I mentioned something that you do not say, for instance, in this place, you cannot say minus 3. Rather, you say bar 3. Why won't you say minus 3? Because the moment you put this minus in front of this very number here, the minus will not only affect 3, it will affect 0.3923. So it affects the entire figure. But when you say bar 3, okay, affects not the entire numbers, but affects only the characteristic. Does that make sense? Good, because your mantissa will not change. So that's for the logarithm of numbers less than 1. We'll move on to multiplication and division. Okay, very quickly, before we consider the multiplication and division of logarithms, let us look at anti-logarithm. Anti-logarithm is really no big deal, except that the rule of placing the decimal point changes. Remember that in logarithm, okay, when you write the characteristic of the logarithm of a particular number, if the number is 4 digits, what would be the characteristic of that logarithm? The characteristic becomes 3. If the number is 4, the characteristic becomes what? 3. If the number is 2 digits, if the number is 4 digits, the characteristic is what? 3. If the number is 2 digits, the characteristic is what? what? The characteristic is 1. Now, if the number is 1, the characteristic is what? 0. Oh, fine. Now, in anti-logarithm, that rule changes. So, if the characteristic of a logarithm, for instance, was 2, okay, let us consider the last example we did, which was 3 point, let's say 3 point, can I get it now? Yes, 3.3923. Good. You remember this figure, right? Now, our characteristic was what? This. In writing the antilog of this, if we were to get the antilog, when we have written down the antilog, which of course will be 39 under 2 difference 3. When we want to write the logarithm, the anti-logarithm of this, it will not. Now, we will place our decimal place, okay? No longer this way, but it will now be 3, 9, 2, 3 point. Well, we may not need to write 0, but of course the decimal place will now move 4 places. 1, 2, 3, 4. The decimal places will shift 4 places, not 3 places like this, but it will shift what? 4 places. Oh well, but sorry to of course disappoint you a little bit. This is not the anti-logarithm. Let's look at a vivid example, okay? Now, there is a question on the board. Find the anti-logarithm of 2.481. Good. Now, this is our number, 2.481. So we will assume that just like the number I wrote earlier, you can resolve that, okay? You resolve that on your own. But let's look at this. The number I wrote earlier is what? 3.3923. Good. But let us consider 2.7481. Now, what is our characteristic in this very logarithm? Our characteristic is what? 2. What is our mantissa? 7481. Is that correct? Good. Now, in getting your anti-logarithm, you will not have any business with 2, which is a characteristic, at the initial stage. These 2 will be used after you have found the anti-logarithm of 74 under 8 difference 1. Now, what is, from my table, the antilog of 74 under 8 is what? 5, 55, 9, 8. Now, difference 1. Difference 1 there is what? 1. So when we add this, we have 55, 9, 9. Good. Now, we will visit our characteristic from the logarithm itself. What is the characteristic here? The characteristic is what? 2. Now I said in anti-logarithm, the rule does what? Changes. So since our characteristic in the logarithm was 2, here we will use not 2 this time, but 2 plus 1 as our characteristic. But we're not writing it, okay? We're not going to say 3.5599. No. This is wrong. We only use this 2 plus 1, which is equal to 3, to shift the decimal places. Of course, 2, because this is positive. So we shift the decimal places to the right, which is what? 1, 2, 3. So our answer becomes antilog, okay? Sorry. Antilog of 2.7481 becomes equal to what? 559.9. So this is our final answer. So what you simply use the characteristic here to do in antilog is to shift the decimal places, okay? Is to shift the decimal places to write your figure. You're not writing characteristic again. You use the characteristic rather to know how many places you shift your decimal places to. And of course, you must always add 1 to the characteristic from the logarithm in antilog. Why it's important that you understand this very concept is because we are going to use it when we start doing multiplication and division of logarithms. Okay, so multiplication and division. When multiplying numbers in logarithm, we add the logarithm of the numbers. After we have got the logarithms, we add the logarithms together. In division, we subtract. Very simple rule. You're asked to evaluate 2 numbers by multiplying them. Get their logarithms, add. You're asked to divide. Get their logarithms and do what? Subtract. After these 2 processes, you get the anti-logarithm. For both cases, get the logarithms, add for multiplication, then get the anti-logarithm. For division, get the logarithms, subtract, then get the anti-logarithm. Simple rule. So we have 2 numbers here to evaluate. So simply, we have our numbers. The number is what? The first number is what? 92.63. Now, what is the logarithm of this number? First of all, you get the you get the characteristic, not so. And what is the characteristic here? The characteristic is what? 1. Very simple. There are 2 digits before the decimal point. So our characteristic is 1. So we now go on to get 92, the logarithm of 92 under 6 difference 3. Of course, when we do that, you simply realize that the mantissa becomes what? 9,667. Okay? Check your four-figure table and verify. And then we go on to get the logarithm of the next one, which is what? 2.914. Of course, what is our characteristic here? 0. Then we get the mantissa, okay, from 29, that is the logarithm of 29 under 1 difference 4. And that will give us what? 4, 6, 4, 5. And then, because we are multiplying, what do? We add. 7 plus 5 will give us 12. Write down 2, carry 1. Drop the 1 here, becomes 7. 7 plus 4 will give us 11. Right? Drop 1, carry 1. And this becomes 7 plus 6 gives us 3. At 13, we drop 3, carry 1. Then drop 1 here, it becomes 10. 10 plus 4 gives us 14. We drop our point. We carry 1. So the 1 adds to this one, and we have 2. So the logarithm here becomes what? The final logarithm here becomes what? 2.4312. Now, are we together? So we go on to get the anti-logarithm of 43 under 1 difference 2. And when we do that, we discover that our answer, okay, will be what? 26, or rather 2699. 2699. Okay? Now, remember the characteristic is what we will use to move our decimal places. So what we have here is 2 as our characteristic, meaning in the anti-log, we will shift the decimal places 3 times. 2 plus 1, 3. Remember? Good. So we have 1, 2, 3. So our decimal point is going to be there. So our final answer is what? 269.9. So when you multiply this number using your calculator or any other means, your final answer is going to be what? 269.9. This, like I mentioned at the beginning, was the method used 3 centuries before the arrival of the calculator that you now press. Now, very quickly, let us evaluate yet another number. So this time we will evaluate 634.7 divided by 26.94. Okay? Number anti-logarithm. The first number is what? 634.7. Now, our number is what? Our number is what? 634.7. And the characteristic is what? 2. In logarithm, the characteristic is what? 2. That is 3 minus 1, because the whole numbers, or rather, the whole number part has 3 digits. So our characteristic is going to be 3 minus 1, which is 2. Now we look for the logarithm of 63 under 4 difference 7. And that will simply give us 8026. We move on to the next one, which is 26.94. Of course, our characteristic is what? 1. And what is our logarithm? What is our mantissa? Our mantissa is what? 4305. Okay? Now, remember, I said in division, you subtract. In multiplication, we added. So this time we are subtracting. 6 minus 5 is 1. 2 minus 0 is 2. 0 minus 3 can go. So we pick 1 from here, drop it here. Okay. So 10 minus 3 becomes 7. 7 minus 4. Of course, remember 7 is what is left here. So 7 minus 4 is what? 3. 2 minus 1 is what? 2 minus 1? 1. So that is our logarithm from multiplying. So the next thing we do is what? We get the antilog. The antilog of this number, or rather this mantissa, okay, remember the antilog, you're going to be dealing with just the mantissa, okay. It is after you have got the antilog, you now use the characteristic to shift the decimal places, okay. Now, what do we do? Antilog of 37 under 2 difference 1 will give us what? 2, 3, 5, 6. Again, we will shift the decimal places one place more than the characteristic. So we're going to shift the decimal places twice, 2 places to the right, okay? So that's 1, 2. So our point comes here. So our final answer is what? 23.56. So if you use your calculator or any means to divide this by this, your final answer is going to be 23.56. Now, that is how it goes. Okay, so we have the next subtopic, which is powers and roots. Powers and roots. And so, we will very quickly look at 2 examples. The first is for power and the second is for roots. Okay, so like I explained, in the case of powers, okay, you multiply, and in the case of roots, you divide. Same as what we had in multiplication and division. Now, of course, you remember, in multiplication, we had 2 numbers multiplying themselves, okay? And there goes that little difference. Here, it's this very number multiplying itself. But you're not going to say, that's the little difference now. You're not going to say 24, you're not going to get the logarithm of 24, okay, 0.7, and then add 2 times and then add them. No, you rather get the logarithm of 24.7 and multiply that logarithm by 2. This is the square root of 467.5. you're not going to do what? Of course, what you do in this case is remember that this very number can be written the same way as 467.5 raised to the power of half, right? So in this case, what you do is you divide. There's a division sign here, right? So you divide by 2. If you had 3 here, you divide by what? 3. If you had 4 here, you divide by 4. And so you divide by 4. And so on and so forth. So that's the way it goes. But since what we have here is just a square root, we are going to divide the logarithm of this number by 2. So now let's proceed. Okay, the number, once again, is what? 24.7. Now, what is our characteristic? Our characteristic is 1. And what is the logarithm of 24 under 7? If you check it, you get 39.27. Okay? Now, because we said in the case of power, you multiply. So you multiply all of these by what? You multiply by 2. When we multiply this by 2, 2 times 7 will give us 14. We carry 1. 2 times 2 will give us 4 plus 1, 5. 2 times 9 will give us 18. We carry 1. 2 times 3 will give us 6 plus the 1 we carried, 7. 2 times 1 will give us 2. And then we go on to do what? To get the anti-logarithm of 78 under 5 difference 4. And when we do that, we find out that we get 610, or rather 6,101. But then our character or characteristic here is 2. So we'll move 3 places to the right, which is 1, 2, 3. Okay, so what's our final answer? 610.1. Now, in the second case, what is our number? Our number is what? This is our antilog, okay? What is our number here? Our number is what? 467.5. What is the characteristic? By now you should know that the characteristic is 2. Of course, you drop your point. And then we go on to get the logarithm of 46 under 7 difference 5. And that will simply give us 6,698. Now, because square root is involved, the square root is the same as, the square root of a number is the same as that number raised to the power of half. Okay? And when you're halving something, you're dividing that thing by 2. Right? So, we divide by 2. Alright, so we divide this number by 2, okay? We begin from here. 2 divide 2 will give you 1, right? Good. Put your point. 2 divide 6, 3, 2 divide 6, 3, 2 divide 9, 4, remaining what? 1. And then you bring the 1 here, so that makes it what? That makes it 18. So 2 divide 18 will give you what? 9. Does that make sense? Oh yeah. Okay, so that gives us 9. So what next do we do? We're almost done. So we get the anti-logarithm of 33 under 4 difference 9, and that gives us 2, 1, 6, 2. However, our characteristic here is 1 under the logarithm. So for the anti-log, we'll move 2 places to the right. And that brings our decimal point here. So the final answer is what? 21.62. 21.62. Now, in logarithm, we have considered, of course, all along, for all of these, we used the 4-figure table, remember. So we used tables all through. Yes, we've looked at the logarithm of numbers greater than 1, logarithm of numbers less than 1, in which case you'd have to use the bar 1, bar 2, bar 3, okay? And then we looked at multiplication, division, we looked at roots and powers and logarithms. So right about now, some questions will be displayed on your screen. Do well to attempt them. They're simple enough, as simple as logarithm is. Replay the video.